Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back to the damp, foggy streets of medieval London. Picture this. The year is somewhere in the late 1300s, and the sun is barely a pale smear through the morning mist. You stand on London Bridge, which isn't just a bridge, it's a whole buzzing neighborhood of its own, crammed with timber-framed houses, tiny shops, and the smell of yesterday's fish clinging stubbornly to the air. Water slaps the wooden pilings below, but you barely notice because already the city is alive. Somewhere a cockerel crows, though its voice is drowned quickly by cart wheels rattling over cobblestones. You tug your cloak, it's damp, it's smoky, and honestly, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you drop your location and your current local time in the comments. I always find it amazing to see where in the world everyone is listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand shoulder to shoulder with strangers on London Bridge, a crush of humanity that feels more like a market than a crossing. Imagine trying to squeeze past a baker who's already got trays of yesterday's hard rolls stacked in front of his stall. Next to him, a barber surgeon leans in his doorway, his tools glinting faintly, scissors, razors, and a bowl stained from yesterday's bloodletting. Don't make eye contact with him, or he'll happily convince you that your humors are out of balance and you need a good bleed. Everywhere the air is alive with sound. You hear the clatter of hooves as horses push through, each carrying some trader's goods. The shouts of boatmen echo up from the Thames below, where are already hustling passengers across the water. A bell clangs in the distance. It might be, though the sound is swallowed by the fog. Somewhere nearby, someone is frying eels, and you swear you can smell it, greasy and oddly sour. Life on London Bridge isn't glamorous, but it's prime real estate. If you're lucky enough to rent a stall here, you'll see more customers in a day than a country villager might see in a week. But the rent is crushing and competition fierce. One historian quipped that the bridge was essentially a medieval shopping mall with a serious flooding problem. And they're not wrong, fires, floods, and collapses plagued this very spot. Still, for now, the bridge is alive and you're part of it. You shuffle forward, slipping around a man pushing a barrow piled high with firewood. The city still runs on wood, not coal, not yet. That'll come later along with the constant smog. For now, the smell of oak and ash blends with the fish stink of the river, the manure underfoot, and the faint tang of tanning pits somewhere upriver. You wrinkle your nose, but you'd better get used to it. This is the smell of money in medieval London. As the fog begins to lift, you notice the city gates ahead, squat and looming. Passing through them, you're struck by the sheer density of it all. Narrow lanes twist like tangled yarn, every building leaning out as if trying to touch its opposite neighbor. Laundry flaps overhead, and rainwater from last night drips down from wooden gutters. Somewhere above, a maid empties a chamber pot, and you hear the splash hit the street with suspicious precision. You step aside quickly, because in this city, survival often comes down to how fast you can dodge falling waste. Despite all this, the streets are alive with possibility. At this hour, the butchers are just setting up, dragging carcasses into their shambles. You don't want to linger, blood mixes with mud underfoot and stray dogs circle like sharks. Beyond, you hear a fishwife crying out her wares. Fresh herring, fresh mackerel, though you suspect fresh is an optimistic term. Even so, customers cluster around, coins clinking, baskets ready. You pause to watch a carpenter hammering together a crate. His arms are corded with muscle, his apron stiff with sawdust. It's a good trade, carpentry, but only if you're part of a guild. Without that, you're little better than a beggar hustling for day wages when work appears. Already you notice apprentices at his side, thin boys with tired eyes. They glance at you, curious, but say nothing. They're bound to their master and their futures are not their own. Not yet. And here, where the reality check sinks in, making a living in medieval London isn't just about skill or luck. It's about survival in a system designed to grind you down. The city's population has swelled to somewhere around 80,000 souls, give or take, a massive metropolis by medieval standards, and second only to Paris in Europe. Imagine trying to carve out a niche in a place where half the people are chasing the same pennies you are. Historians still argue whether living in London was truly better than staying in the countryside. On one hand, you've got opportunities, markets, customers, guilds, and maybe even a shot at social climbing. On the other, you've got disease, crime, competition, and the constant drain of taxes and tolls. It's a gamble either way. As you move deeper into the city, you catch sight of a cathedral rising above the skyline, its spire stabbing at the sky. Pilgrims shuffle toward it, clutching their purses tight. If you're clever, you could sell them trinkets, pilgrim badges, candles, maybe even relics if you're bold enough to fake them. There's always money in faith, but it's risky. Get caught selling a pig's bone as a saint's relic and you'll end up in the stocks, or worse. And so you keep walking, weaving through the crowds. Your stomach growls. Maybe you'll grab a meat pie from a street vendor, though the filling is always a mystery. Sometimes it's mutton, sometimes pigeon, sometimes, well, best not to ask. Still, it's hot, it's filling, and it keeps you going. You hand over a penny, bite into the crust, and try not to wonder what that chewy bit was. It hits you then how precarious life is here. Every penny counts. Every mouthful matters. And for all the bustle, all the shouting and trading and hammering, most of the people around you are balancing on the edge of poverty. You see it in their thin faces, in their patched clothes, in the desperate hustle of their steps. Making a living in medieval London isn't about thriving. It's about clawing your way through each day. Hopping tomorrow doesn't tip you into starvation. You glance back at the bridge, its timbers creaking under the weight of people and goods, and you realize this city is alive, yes, but it's also hungry. Hungry for money, hungry for labor, hungry for your sweat and your soul. And now you're part of it. You push deeper into the maze of streets until the fog burns away in patches, replaced by the raw, noisy pulse of London's marketplaces. It's as if the city itself exhales here, Cheapside especially, the great artery of trade, alive with more voices than your ears can properly sort. The market is less a place and more an assault. Sound, smell, jostling elbows, hawkers with lungs like cathedral bells. At first it's overwhelming. You're pressed on every side, a tide of humanity carried along between stalls. Bark prices with the force of drill sergeants, their aprons slick with scales. Haddock, herring, alive this morning, they cry, though you eye the dull glassiness of their fish in wonder. Bakers stand proudly beside their pyramids of loaves, brown, white, and black bread stacked high, the smell almost hypnotic. But here's the catch. You can smell burned crust too, and you know well enough that London bakers had a reputation for stretching dough with whatever filler was handy. Chalk, bean flour, sawdust, things that make you thankful you didn't ask for a second bite of that pie earlier. You crane your neck and notice that even the stalls themselves tell stories. Cloth merchants drape bolts of dyed wool like banners, scarlets and indigos so bright they seem impossible against the gray sky. These are luxuries, symbols of status. Most people around you, yourself included, are in drabber hues, browns, grays, the occasional faded green. A new cloak in crimson, that's months of wages unless you find it on someone's laundry line. Listen carefully and you hear rhythms beneath the chaos. Bell ringers toll the hour, criers shout news, royal decrees, arrests, the latest punishments carried out at. Heads on spikes at London Bridge. One boy hollers, grinning as if it's gossip about a neighbor. For a moment, you're distracted by a juggler balancing apples on his nose, children squealing at the sight. Behind him, though, a pickpocket's hand slips expertly into a distracted merchant's purse. You're reminded that every smile here hides a hustle. It's not just goods being sold, but survival strategies. Look left. There's a woman hawking hot chestnuts from a little brazier. Look right. An old man rents out patched shoes for a penny a day since some can't afford to buy their own. You hear a shepherd from outside the walls bargaining fiercely with a butcher, his sheep bleeding miserably nearby. Even the smells compete. Roasted meat, sour ale, fresh bread, raw onions, sweat, horse dung, wood smoke. It's almost dizzying. like a medieval perfume made from every scent the human nose can register. The deeper you go, the clearer the class lines appear. Wealthy merchants strut in fur-lined cloaks, their purses bulging, pausing at goldsmiths' stalls with the assurance of men who will eat meat every day this week. Poor laborers, meanwhile, clutch halfpennies, bargaining over scraps of cheese. You realize that in a single glance you can see London's entire social pyramid. Lords, guild masters, petty traders, beggars. Everyone's here, shoulder to shoulder, and yet universes apart. Historians still argue whether these markets were great levelers or cruel reminders of inequality. On the one hand, everyone technically had access. You, a beggar, could theoretically stand next to a knight, both sniffing the same apples. On the other, the prices were a wall thicker than any city gate. What good is a stall stacked with gleaming fish when you can't afford even the stale tail end? Your eye catches on something odder, a man selling powdered unicorn horn. You smirk. Likely it's narwhal tusk imported by Norse traders, but here it's touted as a cure for poison. People gather eagerly, coins exchanged for powder to sprinkle in wine. You mutter under your breath, yeah, that'll help when your bread's half sawdust. But you can't deny the performance works. Medieval London loves a good miracle cure, no matter how improbable. Nearby, a dispute erupts. A fishwife slaps a customer with her wet apron, shrieking that he tried to underpay. A small crowd forms instantly, half jeering, half cheering. Markets are as much entertainment as commerce. You find yourself grinning, though you edge away quickly. The city watch doesn't look kindly on disturbances, and you don't need trouble. Beneath the bustle, though, lies desperation. Prices swing with harvests, with weather, with rumor. One bad storm in the channel, and suddenly bread costs twice as much. You hear a woman complain she hasn't eaten meat in a month. Another clutches turnips like treasure. And here's a fact most don't know. London was so dependent on imported grain that merchants sometimes hoarded supplies to drive up prices. Ordinary people paid the cost, and starvation wasn't an abstract fear. It was a regular visitor. Your stomach growls again and you stop at a pie seller's tray. The man flashes a gap-toothed grin. Finest in Cheapside, pigeon, venison, or rabbit. You pick one at random, hoping he's telling the truth. The crust is warm, flaky on the outside, though the filling tastes suspiciously like yesterday's scraps. Still, it's food. You keep chewing. Around you, others do the same. Hunger trumps taste every time. And then, like a drumbeat, you're reminded of power. A group of guild officers marches past, robes gleaming, their badges catching the weak sunlight. They inspect stalls, check measures, scold bakers for short loaves. The authority is absolute. One frown from them and your goods might be confiscated. You notice bow slightly as they pass, lips tight. Guilds run this city as much as the king does. It dawns on you that survival here is not just about hard work, but about knowing who to flatter, who to bribe, who to avoid. One wrong word and you're out of business. One false measure and your stall is gone. In this noisy market, silence can be more dangerous than shouting. The afternoon deepens. Shadows lengthen, but the crowd hardly thins. Street performers light torches, juggle, beat drums. Ale flows, coin purses jingle, deals are struck in whispers behind stalls. You feel both energized and drained, like the city is squeezing you, taking your breath, your attention, your money, and still asking for more. As you edge back toward the quieter lane, you take one last look at Cheapside. For all its color and chaos, it's a mirror of London itself, full of opportunity, full of danger, full of noise. If you want to make a living here, you'll have to learn to shout louder, bargain harder, and maybe, just maybe, keep one hand on your purse at all times. You drift away from the chaos of Cheapside, and the clamor softens behind you, though it never really fades. London is never quiet, not even at night when drunken voices echo down the lanes. But here, in the shadow of guild halls, the noise takes on a new character. It isn't the raw shout of the market, but the measured stomp of boots, the clink of keys, the murmur of men in authority. Guilds rule this city. That fact becomes clear the moment you stop to watch the comings and goings outside one of their imposing halls. The doors are heavy oak, bound with iron, and above them hangs a carved sign, the emblem of that particular brotherhood. Carpenters, fishmongers, mercers, grocers, vintners. Each craft has its own fortress, its own rules, its own monopoly. If you want to earn more than scraps in London, you'll eventually end up here, cap in hand, hopping they let you in. You shift uneasily on the cobbles because here's the rub. Getting into a guild is no easy matter. You can't just walk up and say, "Hey, I bake bread, can I join?" No, you need sponsorship. You need to be born into the right family or serve a grueling apprenticeship under a master or marry well. Otherwise, you'll spend your life on the outside, scrabbling for whatever crumbs the guild leaves behind. And make no mistake, the guilds guard their crumbs jealously. They set prices, control quality, enforce training, and punish those who try to undercut them. Historians still argue whether this was protection for customers or simply a cartel in fancy robes. To you, watching the officers parade past in their fur-trimmed gowns, the answer feels obvious. It's about power, pure and simple. You edge closer and listen to a dispute. A young man stands wringing his cap, explaining that he only sold a few shoes without permission. The guild officer scowls. Unauthorized trade, that's poaching. A fine at minimum, maybe confiscation. The young man pleads his wife is sick, his children hungry. The officer shrugs, unmoved. Rules are rules. You see the desperation in the man's eyes as he hands over coins, his shoulders slumping. One more nail in his coffin of poverty. And yet for those inside, guild life has its perks. Protection, connections, a steady flow of work. Masters wield authority like kings in miniature. They sit at long tables during feasts, goblets raised, speaking of commerce and honor. Apprentices wait on them, learning by osmosis. Dream of one day rising to their seats. It's a ladder, but one greased so only a few ever climb to the top. You wander past another hall, this one belonging to the worshipful company of fishmongers. Its symbol, a pair of fish, gleams on the wall. The irony isn't lost on you. These men in velvet cloaks decide whether a fishwife in Cheapside gets to sell herring tomorrow. Power disguised as administration. You remember the fishwife smacking that customer with her apron earlier. Would she still be so bold if she knew her whole livelihood could vanish with a single guild decree? A whisper reaches your ears. Some say certain guilds deliberately restrict new members to keep competition down. Others claim bribes grease the wheels. It's hard to prove, but it feels true. You've seen enough already to know that fairness is not London's ruling virtue. You pause outside the goldsmith's hall, dazzled by the glitter in the window. Rings, goblets, crucifixes, all gleaming. These men aren't just artisans, they're bankers, lenders, trusted keepers of wealth. In their hands, money multiplies. In yours, it slips through your fingers like water. For a fleeting moment, you imagine what it must be like to stand inside, to sit at their tables, to be welcomed as a peer. But reality tugs at your sleeve. You're not from the right family, not wealthy enough, not anyone of note. The doors stay shut. And here's a quirky truth. Guilds didn't just control work. They also marched in parades, staged plays, sponsored feasts. Join one and you weren't just buying economic security, you were buying a place in society. You became part of London's fabric, stitched into its ceremonies. Outside the guild, you're a thread fraying in the wind. Inside, you're woven into the tapestry. It's more than work, it's belonging. But belonging comes at a price. You overhear another conversation, two gossiping about their master. He underfeeds them, they whisper, keeps them working from dawn to dusk, barely giving them scraps. Yet they dare not complain because the master could ruin them with a word. You think of the apprentices you saw earlier, their thin faces. It's a reminder, even inside the guild, life isn't easy. Security doesn't always mean comfort. As you keep walking, you see a boy sweeping outside a hall. He can't be older than 10, his tunic too big, his hands raw from labor. You ask what he does, and he mutters that he's just a servant. But you notice the way his eyes linger on the hall door, hungry for the life within. Maybe he dreams of one day being apprenticed. Maybe he just dreams of enough bread. Either way, you recognize that look, the gaze of someone staring at a locked gate, wishing for the key. Historians debate whether guilds were progressive institutions or shackles on economic freedom. Some argue they preserved high standards, kept fraud in check, and maintained order in chaotic markets. Others say they stifled innovation, hoarded privilege, and shut out the poor. As you pass yet another hall, you can't help siding with the latter view. It looks less like protection and more like a fortress of wealth. You reach a square where several guild halls cluster, their stone fronts grim and immovable. The air smells faintly of wax and ink, records kept, contracts sealed, lives controlled by parchment. A bell rings, summoning members to a meeting. Men file in, heads high, the crowd parting respectfully. You stand outside, part of the crowd that will never enter. And in that moment, the truth hits like a blow. London is a city of gates, and most of them are locked from the inside. For now, you turn away, back toward the twisting alleys. But the weight of those barred doors follows you. If you ever want to truly make a living here, you'll need to find a way past the gatekeepers, or learn to survive forever on the outside. The alleys twist and narrow until you find yourself in a quieter quarter, though the quiet doesn't last. A hammer clangs inside a workshop, followed by the hiss of bellows. The smell of hot iron leaks through the doorframe, sharp and metallic, catching in your throat. You peek inside and see the heart of London's labor system in action, the workshop of a guild master, where apprentices are bent over their benches like shadows of their teacher. Apprenticeship is the ladder everyone whispers about. It's the supposed golden ticket into stability, into belonging. Without it, you're just another day laborer waiting at the market gates, begging for work that may or may not come. But with it, a chance, however slim, at becoming a master yourself. So you watch the boys at their benches and wonder, what's it really like to be bound in service? The truth is, it's less golden ticket and more golden cage. If you're lucky, you're placed into a trade at 12 or 13, though some boys start even earlier. Your parents pay the master a fee, yes, they pay, even though you're the one doing the labor. The agreement is sealed in a contract, often notarized with witnesses, and from that day forward, your life is no longer your own. 7 years, that's the standard. 7 years of service, obedience, and silence. Imagine it now. You rise before dawn in your master's house, maybe sharing a straw pallet with 2 other boys in a room that smells of sweat and mildew. Your first task isn't noble work at a bench. It's hauling water, scrubbing floors, feeding animals if the household keeps them. Apprenticeship isn't just about craft, it's about being your master's everything. Errand runner, servant, laborer, scapegoat. If the chamber pot tips, guess who's cleaning it? Breakfast is thin. Maybe pottage, that thick oat gruel with luck a scrap of bread. Then the real day begins. You shuffle into the workshop bleary-eyed and the hours stretch endlessly ahead. You practice sawing, hammering, stitching, whatever the craft demands under the watchful eye of your master. His word is law. If he scolds, you bow your head. If he strikes, you endure it. Complaining isn't an option. You're bound by contract. Still, you learn. Slowly, painfully, your hands memorize the trade. The apprentice at the forge knows just when the iron glows orange enough to bend. The boy in the tailor's shop stitches neat seams until his fingers bleed. The scrivener's pupil grinds ink until his knuckles ache. Skills seep into you drop by drop, like rain into a leaky roof. And if you're clever, if you endure, those skills might one day make you valuable. But here's the irony, valuable to whom? To the master, certainly. He gains years of cheap labor, room and board your only wage. To the guild, which swells its ranks with controlled recruits. To yourself, maybe, maybe not. Historians still argue whether most apprentices ever rose beyond. Some did, sure. There are records of men starting as humble apprentices and rising to wealth and office. But for many, the promise dangled in front of them never materialized. You hear a sharp voice. One boy has dropped a tool and his master's hand cracks across his cheek. The boy doesn't cry, though his eyes glisten. Discipline is part of the bargain, accepted if not welcomed. Apprenticeship was as much about shaping character as shaping skill, or at least that's what the masters like to say. You suspect it was mostly about reminding boys of their place. As the day grinds on, you notice how apprenticeship swallows not just work but life itself. The boys eat at their master's table, but only after everyone else has finished. They wear whatever tunics he provides, often hand-me-downs. They cannot marry during their service, cannot travel without permission, cannot make decisions beyond what to dream about at night. Freedom is a word for later, if later ever comes. There's a whisper of rebellion, though. One apprentice sneaks you a glance as he sharpens a blade. His eyes flash with something dangerous, resentment. You've heard stories, apprentices who ran away, who broke contracts, who disappeared into the sprawl of London's alleys. Some were caught and dragged back, punished harshly. Others, well, some say they joined the underworld, thieves, beggars, mercenaries. After all, once you've spent years taking orders, there's a strange appeal in lawlessness. And yet, not everything about apprenticeship is bleak. You see camaraderie in the way the boys share a wink behind the master back, or how they swap tips or sneak crusts of bread to one another. Brotherhood grows in the cracks of oppression. Sometimes these bonds last a lifetime, fellow apprentices becoming lifelong friends, allies in the struggle for survival. There's also a certain pride when the work goes well. You watch one boy carefully etch a design into silver, his hand steady despite the heat. When the master nods, just a tiny nod, the boy's chest lifts. Recognition is rare, but when it comes, it feels like sunlight in a dungeon. A quirky tidbit you overhear. Some masters are notorious for feeding apprentices endless pies stuffed with questionable meat. Cheap protein, they say. The boys joke darkly about rat pies, though whether it's a joke or not, you're not entirely sure. You make a mental note never to accept a free supper from a goldsmith's apprentice. Outside, dusk gathers and the apprentices stumble into the streets, their day not quite finished. Some are sent to run errands, deliver finished goods, fetch supplies. Others trail after their masters like shadows. You follow one down an alley where he stops at a tavern door. He waits while his master drinks inside, eyes drooping, but he dare not wander. It strikes you how apprenticeships are less about craft and more about control. 7 years is a long leash, but it's still a leash. Still, some apprentices endure, and more than that, they succeed. You remember hearing about Dick, the boy who supposedly came to London poor and barefoot, apprenticed himself to a mercer, and eventually became Lord Mayor of the city. His story is half legend, half fact, but it burns bright in apprentices' minds. If he could climb the ladder, maybe they can too. Maybe you can. But as you watch the weary boys shuffle home, you know the truth. For every, there are 100 nameless apprentices who spent 7 years breaking their backs only to become, scraping along on wages barely better than servants. For every story of success, countless others ended in quiet mediocrity or outright failure. You pause in the twilight, leaning against a timbered wall. The sound of hammering still echoes from inside the workshop, even at this hour. Apprenticeship is supposed to be the path to a living, but you can't shake the feeling it's just another cage, one more gatekeeping system in a city full of them. And tomorrow, those boys will rise again before dawn, bend their backs, bow their heads, and keep grinding. The wheel turns, and London turns with it, crushing and lifting lives with equal indifference. The streets of London hum with noise, but as you move toward the market square, you begin to notice something curious. Everywhere you look, men's voices dominate the guild halls, the workshops, the stalls. But the city itself runs on a quieter current, an undercurrent carried by women. They're not always in the foreground, yet they're everywhere. Bending over laundry tubs, stirring great vats of ale, hawking fish by the river, spinning wool in the thresholds of timbered houses. You might have thought at first that making a living in medieval London was a man's game. The records certainly make it seem that way. Charters, guild rolls, contracts, all bristling with male names. But the truth is far more complex. If you pause, you can see women's labor woven invisibly into every thread of the city's fabric. Without it, London would collapse into silence. Take the markets, for instance. At Cheapside, the city's grandest trading street, the shouts of sellers fill the air. But many of those voices belong to women, balancing baskets dripping with the morning's catch, dairy maids calling out the freshness of their milk, herb sellers waving bunches of thyme and sage like flags. Their cries are sharper, quicker than the men's, honed by years of practice. Some are so famous for their voices that chroniclers joke about them. The shrill cry of London becomes almost a proverb. Imagine yourself there now. You're shoulder to shoulder with a fishwife whose fingers are red from ice-cold Thames water. She leans close, pressing her wares into your hands with such force you nearly buy them out of instinct. This is her battlefield, her voice, her wit, her hustle. She can't join the fishmongers' guild. That door is barred. But here in the marketplace, she fights for her family's survival with every shouted bargain. Others work at home, but no less fiercely. You glance down an alley and see a woman hunched over a spinning wheel, her foot pumping steadily. Spinning and weaving are so common among women that records barely bother to mention them. But think, every cloak, every hood, every blanket in this city has passed through hands like hers. This work isn't women's craft in the patronizing sense. It is the backbone of London's economy. And then there's brewing. Before beer became the male-dominated industry it would later be, ale was the province of women. They were called alewives, and you can almost smell their work as you pass a yard where a woman stirs a steaming vat. Her sleeves are rolled high, her hair damp from the vapor. Ale doesn't last long without spoiling, so she brews it in small batches, sells it quickly, and then brews again. It's constant, exhausting work, but it keeps coins trickling into her household. Of course, with visibility comes scrutiny. City officials and moralists alike were quick to sneer at alewives. Satirical poems paint them as cheats who water down their ale, or temptresses who lure men to drink too deeply. You can almost hear the sneer in the verses. Beware the alewife's cup. But beneath the mockery lies an uncomfortable truth. These women were competitors. They carved out spaces in an economy that guilds wanted to keep tightly controlled. So the ridicule became a weapon, one more way to keep women's work in the shadows. Yet despite these obstacles, women found ways to maneuver. Some became unofficial members of their husbands' guilds, working alongside them in workshops and shops. Picture a goldsmith's wife, carefully polishing a bracelet while her husband haggles with a client. The record might list only his name, but her skill is what ensures the piece glitters. Or a baker's wife rising at midnight to knead dough, her arms aching with the weight of it, so the loaves are ready when the ovens heat at dawn. You recall a telling clause in city ordinances. If a widow inherited her husband's workshop, she could often continue the business in his name. This was not generosity, it was practicality. The city needed bread baked, shoes cobbled, cloth dyed. So widows stepped into the breach and some thrived. There are stories of widows who grew businesses larger than their husbands ever did, managing apprentices, overseeing trade, earning quiet respect. But even then, their authority was seen as borrowed, temporary, tied always to a man's shadow. Consider, too, the unrecorded labor, the endless tasks of maintaining a household. Cooking, cleaning, child-rearing, caring for the sick, none of it glamorous, none of it noted in guild rolls, yet all of it essential. A merchant's accounts might show profit from cloth sold, but those numbers don't reveal the wife who stretched meals, mended garments, and taught children their prayers. You realize with a pang that whole armies of women lived and died without their labor ever being written down. Sometimes, though, their voices break through. London's court records are full of cases involving women. Some sue over debts, defending the small economies they've scraped together. Others are accused of scolding or brawling, evidence perhaps of the sheer pressure of survival. One famous case tells of Alice, who ran a tavern so successfully that she became notorious in the ward rolls. Officials tried to curb her influence, but her name echoes centuries later. And then there's the question of morality. Women's work was always judged not just by its quality but by its virtue. A man could sell ale without raising eyebrows, but an alewife was painted as a corrupter. A man could keep a shop without comment, but a woman shopkeeper might be whispered about, her independence suspicious. You see how double-edged survival is here. Women must work, yet when they do, they're blamed for working. Still, women carved niches. Think of the laundresses who lined the Thames, scrubbing linen white against stones. Their laughter rang out over the water, coarse and strong, even as their hands cracked from cold. Think of whose knowledge of birth made them indispensable, though they were often accused of sorcery if anything went wrong. Think of beguines, religious women who lived in semi-communal houses, neither nuns nor wives, supporting themselves through weaving, nursing, or teaching. Each of these roles gave women a foothold, precarious but real, in a city that wanted to keep them invisible. One quirky detail you catch in a chronicler's account: sometimes women brought lawsuits together. A group of once marched to court to complain about unfair tolls at the market gates. Imagine the sight: skirts muddy, baskets banging against their hips, voices raised not in selling but in protest. It didn't overturn the system, but it showed solidarity. Survival wasn't always solitary, sometimes it was collective. The sun begins to dip, and you pass a row of houses where candlelight glimmers through shutters. Inside, women sit at looms or spin flax by the fire, children drowsing at their feet. You realize that this is the real rhythm of London, the ceaseless hum of women's labor, unmarked but unyielding. Men may hold the guild charters, but women hold the city's pulse. And yet the tragedy lingers. Most of their names are gone. They were erased not by accident but by design. The chroniclers who wrote about kings and guild masters seldom thought the fishwife's cry worth recording. The clerks who inked contracts seldom considered the brewer's wife an equal partner. Their absence in the records is not proof of absence in life. It's proof of silence enforced. You step back into the bustling market square, hearing again the overlapping voices of men and women alike. For a moment the veil lifts and you see it clearly. Half of London's survival rested on women's backs. Half of its streets were paved with their effort. Half of its wealth brewed in their vats, spun on their wheels, raised in their kitchens. The history books may not say it outright, but standing here, you know. Without them, there would have been no medieval London at all. By now, you've learned that medieval London is not a place for the faint of heart. The air itself seems to choke you, thick with smoke from 1,000 hearths and the stench of human waste wafting from alleys. You might think, wandering these streets, that everyone longs for a cushy job behind a merchant's counter or a clerk's desk. But the reality is harsh. The city survives because ordinary people take on dirty, dangerous, thankless jobs, roles that make life possible for others but leave their own bodies battered, poisoned, or short. You catch sight of one such man now. He shuffles past you with a wicker basket strapped to his back. The smell hits before you can even look closely, an acrid, nose-burning stench that makes you gag. He's a gong farmer, one of the most notorious professions in medieval England. His work: emptying cesspits and privies, carting away human waste under the cover of night. The nickname gong comes from the Old English word for filth. Gong farmers wade into it waist-deep, sometimes even shoulder-deep, scraping muck into buckets, hauling it away. Imagine that, your entire livelihood built on digging through other people's leavings. And yet, paradoxically, this was a job that could pay decently, at least compared to others. Gong farmers earned hazard pay before the term existed because few were willing to do the work. But no amount of coin could disguise the stigma. They stank permanently, marked by their trade, forced to live apart from others. Children jeered, adults avoided them. Yet without them, the city would drown in its own waste. You wrinkle your nose and hurry on, grateful your lot, precarious as it is, doesn't involve climbing into cesspits at midnight. Not all dangerous jobs are so obviously foul. Step into a tanner's yard and you'll find a different sort of nightmare. The smell here is sharper, chemical, a mix of animal fat, urine, and harsh lime. Hides hang from poles, dripping, while workers beat them, scrape them, soak them in vats. To tan leather, they must soak skins in foul solutions, sometimes even in dog dung. Your stomach lurches as you watch a man dunk his arms in up to the elbow, pulling out a dripping hide. His skin is cracked and red from exposure, his eyes watering from fumes. Tanning is essential. The leather produced here becomes shoes, belts, armor, books. But the price is high. Many tanners suffer from sores, breathing troubles, even blindness. They're often pushed to the margins of town, both literally and socially. People mutter about them the way they do about gong farmers, necessary but undesirable. And yet, like the gong farmers, they endure because someone has to do it, and because the coins keep their families fed. Move closer to the river and you'll see another kind of danger: dock work. Barges line the Thames, unloading barrels, timber, sacks of grain. Men swarm over them like ants, carrying loads on their backs, rolling casks down planks, shouting instructions over the rush of the tide. It looks almost energetic, even heroic, but stay long enough and you see the toll. A slip on a wet plank can send a man crashing into the water, weighed down by his cargo. A barrel can crush ribs or legs. Dockhands labor without protection, their bodies the only machines available. And then there are the smiths. You wander into a smithy and feel the heat immediately. The forge glows red, sparks shower the floor, hammers ring against anvils. The smith wipes sweat from his brow, muscles straining as he pounds metal into shape. It looks powerful, almost majestic, but the danger is everywhere. Burns, crushed fingers, blindness from sparks, all common. And the noise alone deafens you after only minutes. Imagine years of that pounding in your ears. Everywhere you look, the city thrives on labor that chews up the laborers. Chimney sweeps children often crawl into flues, choking on soot, scraping away buildup in spaces barely wider than their bodies. Haul heavy pails through streets, spines bent from the weight. Carters whip horses pulling loads that can snap axles and bones with equal ease. And then, of course, the butchers. At first glance, their stalls look ordinary, meat hanging from hooks, customers haggling. But step behind the counter and you see the gore of their trade. Slaughterhouses ring with squeals and blood, workers swinging axes, wrestling animals that do not go quietly. Blood slicks the floor, knives flash, men curse as hooves strike. Butchers are strong, but strength alone doesn't save them. Cuts fester, infections spread, accidents happen. And the city, of course, depends utterly on their work. It would be easy to think these jobs were just misery, but here, where it gets complicated, some of them carried a kind of pride. Smiths were admired for their skill, butchers respected for their toughness, even gong farmers grudgingly acknowledged for their bravery. And sometimes these dangerous trades gave rise to curious perks. Tanners, for instance, often had access to cheap scraps of leather. Butchers might take home offcuts of meat. Dockhands developed uncanny knowledge of goods flowing into London, sometimes using it to their advantage. There's also the question of wages. Historians still argue whether dangerous trades truly paid better. Some evidence suggests gong farmers and tanners earned more than, say, spinners or bakers. Others point out that wages were inconsistent, and the social stigma erased much of the advantage. What good is extra coin if you're barred from guilds, mocked in taverns, and sick by 40? Yet people took these jobs, generation after generation. Why? Because survival leaves little choice. If you're the son of a tanner, you likely become one yourself. If you're desperate for work, you take what's available. If you're strong, maybe the docks will feed you. You learn to accept the danger, laugh it off, even joke about it. That gallows humor becomes a shield. Imagine the gong farmers swapping tailies of who found the strangest thing in a cesspit, or dockhands betting on who can haul the heaviest sack. Laughter softens the edges, even as the work breaks their bodies. One fringe tidbit that might surprise you: some of these workers recycled what others discarded. Gong farmers, for example, didn't just remove waste, they sold it. Human excrement mixed with straw became fertilizer for fields. Imagine that. Your disgusting job also becomes part of the agricultural cycle, turning filth into food. Tanners, too, recycled, turning animal parts into glue, fat into soap. Even the butchers sold bones to be carved into buttons or combs. Nothing was wasted, because nothing could be. As you watch, it becomes clear. London's survival depended on those willing to embrace filth, fire, and risk. The merchants and clerks may seem more respectable, but without the waste carriers, tanners, dockhands, and butchers, the city would collapse. The irony hits you. These workers live shortest, suffer most, and yet they are the foundation on which everyone else stands. The day fades and you leave the tannery yard, your clothes still clinging to the smell. You think of the gong farmer trudging home, the dockhand nursing bruised shoulders, the smith rubbing soot from his eyes. They are invisible in the chronicles, unmentioned in the rolls of kings, but their sweat and their danger hold the city together. You pull your cloak and step into the evening crowd, suddenly aware that every stone, every loaf, every cloak owes something to their invisible, perilous toil. The streets of London at dusk take on a different character. The clamor of markets quiets, the hammering of smiths fades, and in its place rises another kind of rhythm. The shuffle of feet in alleyways, the whispers in tavern corners, the clink of dice on wooden tables. You sense it immediately. Danger hums beneath the surface. For those who cannot survive by honest work, or simply find that honest work leaves them too hungry, the lure of crime beckons. It doesn't take long to notice how deeply crime is woven into the fabric of medieval London. Petty theft, gambling, fencing stolen goods, outright robbery. These are not rare exceptions, but daily hazards. Walk the crowded lanes and you'll feel nimble fingers brush against your cloak, testing for a purse. One moment, you're admiring spices in Cheapside. The next, your coin pouch is gone, slipped away by a boy no older than 12 who disappears into the press of bodies before you can shout. Children, in fact, often serve as accomplices in the city's underground economy. Too young to join a guild, too poor to apprentice, they become pickpockets, message runners, or lookouts. The image might seem Dickensian to your modern imagination, but it's medieval too. You watch a boy dart across the street, slip a hand into a baker's cart, and vanish with a roll clutched tight. Hunger makes thieves out of many who might never otherwise dare. And where there is petty theft, there are also professionals. Cut purses, men and women skilled in slicing cords that hold coin pouches, train their hands to be quicker than the eye. They haunt fairs, feast days, and processions, where the crush of bodies provides cover. Some become legends in their wards, feared and admired all at once. The city watches for them, but the city also creates them. Because when labor pays barely enough to survive, the glimmer of easy money is irresistible. Step into a tavern after dark and the atmosphere thickens. Smoke curls from rushlight torches, ale sloshes from mugs, voices rise in argument. At one table, dice clatter across a board. Gambling is illegal. The authorities issue proclamations against it again and again. But the sound of dice never truly stops. Men wager their week's wages, women stake their household goods, apprentices risk the shoes off their feet. You sit at the edge of a table and feel the tension as coins change hands. A carpenter curses his luck, a sailor laughs as he pockets winnings. Then a scuffle breaks out, accusations of cheating, knives half drawn. The lure of quick gain always carries the shadow of violence. Beyond the tavern walls, more organized crimes await. Highway robbery just outside the city gates is common enough that travelers whisper prayers before leaving London. Gangs of thieves prowl the roads, waiting for merchants too poorly guarded. Inside the city, alleys become ambush points where a lone walker might be relieved of cloak, shoes, and dignity. You can almost hear the sudden rush of feet behind you, the barked command, "Stand and deliver." And yet, for all the danger, there's a strange allure here. Crime offers what lawful work cannot: freedom from guild restrictions, the chance for sudden wealth, the thrill of beating a system that seems stacked against you. The young apprentice who resents his master's cruelty might sneak coins from the till. The widow struggling to feed her children might buy stolen goods at a discount. Even the well-off sometimes dip into shady dealings, lending money at usurious rates or betting on illegal games. Historians still argue whether medieval London's crime was worse than that of other cities or simply better recorded. Some point to the detailed rolls of the city courts, filled with cases of theft, assault, and fraud. Others suggest London was no more violent than Paris or Florence, only more bureaucratic. What is certain is that crime was not marginal. It was woven into the rhythms of daily life. Consider, for instance, the practice of coining. In dark corners, men shave tiny slivers from silver pennies, gathering enough to melt down and sell while passing the clipped coins back into circulation. It's treason if caught, punishable by death, but the temptation persists. Or think of counterfeiters striking false coins with stolen molds. These are not desperate street urchins, but skilled craftsmen bending their talents to dangerous ends. And then there's prostitution, which authorities alternately tolerate and condemn. Licensed brothels operate in places like just across the river, where the Bishop of Winchester himself profits from rents, hence the nickname Winchester geese for the women who work there. For many women, it is the only path left when other work fails. You see them on street corners, painted lips in the torchlight, their eyes wary but defiant. The city fathers issue proclamations against them, but they also rely on the steady stream of money the trade generates. Hypocrisy sits comfortably in the council chambers. In the underworld, reputations matter. A skilled thief might gather a crew, a loose gang bound by loyalty, fear, and opportunity. Some graduate to more daring crimes, burglaries, break-ins, even daring daylight robberies. The sheriffs try to keep pace, but the maze of London's alleys offers countless hiding places. You imagine a pursuit through narrow lanes, guards shouting, boots pounding, until the quarry slips into a crowd and vanishes as though swallowed by the city itself. Punishments for crime are harsh. Stocks and pillories wait in market squares, ready to humiliate offenders before the public. Imagine standing there, wrists locked, while neighbors jeer and pelt you with rotten vegetables. More serious crimes bring harsher penalties, whippings, brandings, hangings at. The spectacle is deliberate, meant to terrify others into obedience. And yet, despite the severity, crime continues. The fear of punishment is no match for the fear of hunger. There's also a theatrical side to this world. Court records reveal criminals spinning elaborate defenses, claiming mistaken identity, inventing alibis, pointing fingers at rivals. Sometimes juries believe them. Sometimes juries, swayed by sympathy, convict lightly even when guilt is clear. Crime, justice, and survival all dance together in a complicated performance. One quirky detail. Certain taverns were notorious as gathering places for thieves, and one chronicler notes that sometimes the stolen goods could be bought back from the very same bench where they were lost. Imagine it. You drop your knife in the crowd, a pickpocket nabs it, and that evening you're offered the chance to buy it back for a fraction of its worth. It's both maddening and ingenious, the city feeding on itself. As you wander further into the night, the city feels alive with shadows. A dice game in one corner, a hushed negotiation in another. Somewhere, a shout as a thief is caught, the crowd rushing to watch. Somewhere else, a silent theft goes unnoticed, one more small survival in a city of endless hungers. You realize now that the lure of crime is not just about greed. It's about the impossibility of survival on honest wages, the crushing rules of guilds, the indifference of authorities. Crime becomes a second economy, brutal but flexible, punishing but also rewarding. For some, it's the only ladder out of poverty. For others, it's a shortcut to the same desperation they tried to escape. And so the city lives in balance. Merchants by day, thieves by night, sheriffs chasing shadows, judges handing down sentences, and through it all, the poor balancing hunger against risk. You pull your cloak close and step carefully, knowing that here in London, crime is not an exception but a rhythm. And sooner or later it touches everyone, whether you're the thief, the victim, or simply the bystander caught in the crowd's roar. Morning light spills across the streets again, gilding the rooftops with a deceptive calm. You've seen London's dirty trades and its shadowy crimes, but now your steps carry you toward a quieter corner of the city, the precincts nears, where the sound of hammer and anvil fades, replaced by the scratch of quills, the murmurs of study, the rustle of parchment. Here, survival depends not on brawn or daring, but on ink, memory, and a mastery of words. You notice first the clerks. Their figures are hunched at desks in workshops tucked behind churchyards or near guild halls, parchment stretched taut, balanced carefully. The scratch of quills echoes like a chorus. These men, and very occasionally women, copy legal documents, contracts, letters, anything that requires a trained hand. In a world where few can write, the clerk is both tool and gatekeeper. Without him, no bargain is binding, no court case official, no business sealed. Imagine you've brought a dispute to one such office. A clerk greets you, dipping his quill. His hands are stained black with ink, his cuffs worn shiny from constant resting on the desk. He writes with a speed and elegance that seems almost magical to you, the letters curling like miniature architecture. You lean closer, fascinated, and then you realize he's not just writing, he's shaping your life. One misplaced word could alter the meaning of a contract. One deliberate tweak could cost you land or coin. Clerks are not just copyists, they wield quiet power. And yet their lives are hardly luxurious. Most clerks earn modest fees, scraping together a living document by document. Their rooms smell of ink and wax. Their eyes strain under flickering candlelight. Too much writing warps their backs and stiffens their fingers. A clerk might joke that the only thing worse than poverty is carpal tunnel. But of course, he doesn't have the term. He just knows his hands ache constantly. Nearby, scribes labor for the church. In the scriptorium of a monastery or cathedral school, the air is heavy with incense and silence. Monks bend over great tomes, illuminating the pages with red and blue capitals, painstakingly copying sacred texts. But London's scribes aren't only cloistered monks. Many are lay professionals, producing service books, prayer guides, or even romances for the wealthy. If you could afford a manuscript, you commission one here, the scribe's nimble hand creating not just words but art. One quirky tidbit: parchment, the material most scribes use, is made from stretched animal skins. To your eyes it seems impossibly smooth, but you can still see faint traces of veins, even hair follicles. Imagine writing day after day on what is essentially a shaved sheep or calf. Ink doesn't always cooperate, it blots, smears, sometimes even eats through the surface. A scribe's patience is legendary because one slip can ruin days of labor, and if you make a mistake, there's no easy eraser. You scrape the parchment with a knife, rubbing away the ink, leaving a faint scar. Every medieval manuscript carries these ghosts of error. Not all writing is lofty. Some clerks make their money recording tavern debts, court rolls, or even the bawdy verses that Londoners exchange for amusement. There's always work for someone who can wield a pen, but the danger lies in reliance. A clerk's fortune depends on patrons, lawyers, guilds, priests, merchants. Without steady commissions, the quill grows silent and hunger follows swiftly. You wander further and find yourself among students. This cathedral runs a grammar school and smaller schools cluster nearby. The boys recite Latin aloud, their voices rising and falling like waves. Some are sons of merchants or clerics, others poor boys granted charity. Their days are long, memorization, recitation, endless drills. Corporal punishment is common. You hear the sharp crack of a rod and flinch. To learn Latin is to open doors, to church office, to legal clerkship, to teaching. But the road is harsh. Many stumble along the way. Beyond the cathedral schools lies the lure of Oxford or Cambridge, though both are distant. Yet London itself has a lively intellectual life. Students roam the streets, half-learned, half-rowdy, filling taverns with arguments about theology, logic, or Aristotle's philosophy. Their presence is both admired and despised. To some, they're the future of England's learning. To others, they're drunken nuisances, quick to brawl, quicker still to scorn the illiterate. You can almost hear them now, quarreling over whether universals exist in reality or only in the mind. Topics so abstract you wonder how they'll ever buy bread with them. Still, an education has its rewards. Clerical posts in the church often go to the literate. A scribe who rises high enough might become a notary, drafting official documents with authority. Some even rise to chancellorships, wielding ink like a weapon of governance. Knowledge is power, but in medieval London, it's power for the few. Most people will never hold a quill, never read more than a scrap of a prayer. Historians still argue whether literacy was more widespread in medieval London than in rural England. Some point to the city's bustling commerce and constant need for records as evidence that basic literacy spread more broadly here. Others argue it was still limited to elites, clerks, and apprentices in certain trades. The truth likely lies in between. You notice that even the bakers sometimes recognize their names on a tally, or the marks of familiar numbers. Perhaps literacy trickled further than the records suggest. You linger at a stall where a bookseller displays manuscripts. They are precious beyond belief, each one the work of weeks, months, even years. A gospel book glimmers with gold leaf. A romance of Arthur boasts illustrations of knights and dragons. The prices make your jaw drop. These books are worth more than houses, sometimes more than entire shops. And yet they sell. Wealthy merchants and nobles crave them, not just for knowledge but for status. Owning a fine manuscript is like owning a luxury car in your world, a display of taste and power. But books are not the only written word in London. Graffiti scratches the city walls, prayers, insults, lovers' names. Some in Latin, some in English, some in crude symbols. It's writing for the masses, anonymous, fleeting. You pause at one scrawl near a tavern door. John loves Alice, may she never scold. It's a reminder that even in a city dominated by clerks and scribes, ordinary voices find a way to write themselves into being. One fringe detail that makes you smile. In court records, some illiterate defendants sign their names with little drawings instead. A fish for a fisherman, a shears for a tailor, a cross for the devout. These marks are their identities made visible, proof that even without literacy, people found ways to claim their place in the written world. As you move on, you realize that clerks, scribes, and students form a sort of shadow economy in London, not as visible as markets or dockyards, but no less essential. They stitch together the contracts that bind commerce, the wills that dictate inheritance, the sermons that shape belief. Without them, the city would choke not on filth, but on confusion. And yet their survival is precarious. A clerk who engages his patron starves. A student who fails his grammar school has no future. A scribe who goes blind is ruined. Their work seems clean compared to tanners or gong farmers, but the dangers are subtler. Mental strain, social dependence, fragile eyesight. You feel a strange sympathy for them, these men of ink, trapped by their pens just as surely as dockhands are trapped by ropes and barrels. Night falls again and you pass a small chamber lit by a single candle. Inside, a clerk bends over his parchment, lips moving silently as he forms each letter. His quill scratches softly, endlessly, a sound like rain. His world is small, ink, wax, words, but through those words he shapes the lives of others. You leave him to his work, thinking that survival in London takes many forms. Sometimes it's sweat and filth, sometimes fists and daggers, and sometimes it's nothing more than ink flowing across a page. You rise the next morning to find London humming like a hive again, but the accents around you are not all English. Step into the wharves by the Thames and you'll hear a chorus of tongues. Guttural German, lilting Italian, the clipped syllables of French, the sing-song of Flemish. London is not only England's beating heart, but one of Europe's busiest crossroads. To survive here, you must not only know how to bargain in your own tongue, you may need to haggle in half a dozen. Foreign merchants gather at specific quarters. Down by the steel yard, the great riverside compound of the League, tall warehouses and counting houses loom. You approach the heavy gates, guarded and imposing, and you're greeted not by Londoners but by Germans, stern men in fur-trimmed coats, clerks jotting notes in ledgers, apprentices hustling barrels. They control much of the trade in Baltic timber, wax, fish, and furs. If you need ship masts or fine herrings, this is where you come. But you, a local Londoner, might feel a pinch of resentment. These foreigners seem to live better than many natives, and they enjoy privileges granted by royal charters, cheaper taxes, special trading rights, and their own courts. The tension simmers. You hear mutterings from English merchants who complain they're being squeezed out. Every so often, that tension erupts in riots. The barricade themselves in the steel yard, clutching their privileges while London mobs rage outside. Still, kings rely on their goods and loans, so the balance holds for now. You sense that to be a foreigner in London is both lucrative and dangerous. Wander a little further and you stumble into Lombard Street. Its very name tells you who once dominated here. Italian bankers, often from Lombardy, Florence, or their counting tables are spread with ledgers, their fingers smudged with coin dust rather than ink. They lend to kings and nobles, transferring money across borders with coded letters and ingenious systems of credit. To you, their ways seem almost magical, moving money without moving coin. These Italians whisper about interest and profit, though the church officially bans usury. They dodge the rule with clever language. A fee here, a gift there. Everyone knows what it really is. Historians still argue whether Londoners resented or admired these Lombards more. Some records show envy of their wealth, others suggest grudging respect for their financial genius. Either way, the Lombards left their mark. Even centuries later, Lombard Street will still be London's banking hub. Beyond the Germans and Italians, you notice the French presence. Some are noble exiles, some artisans, many simply traders. They bring fine cloth, wine, and luxury goods. The French tongue is still prestigious in law and literature, even though English has reasserted itself since the Norman conquest. A Londoner who can speak a bit of French has an advantage in court or commerce. Yet when England and France are at war, as they often are, suspicion falls quickly on these residents. One day you're welcomed for your wine, the next you're accused of being a spy. The Flemish loom large in your wanderings. They arrive with bales of cloth, sometimes even whole families settling in weaving districts. Their skills in textiles rival England's own, and that sparks both collaboration and jealousy. English cloth producers grumble that foreigners undercut their prices. At the same time, Flemish techniques enrich the city's craft. Walk past and you might catch their voices in the air, a reminder that London is never entirely English. Of course, not all outsiders are rich merchants. Some are itinerant workers, sailors stranded after a voyage, servants from abroad. You see them in taverns, their accents marking them instantly as different. For them, survival is harder. Without guild protection, they take the worst jobs, and xenophobia can flare suddenly, blamed for crime, for taking jobs, for bringing foreign diseases. You realize quickly that to be an outsider in medieval London is to walk a fine line between opportunity and danger. One quirky tidbit that makes you grin. Records show that some foreign merchants in London kept pet parrots, exotic birds brought from overseas trade routes. Imagine the amazement of Londoners seeing a bright green parrot perched in a counting house, squawking in nonsense syllables while deals worth fortunes are struck. To the locals, it must have seemed like wizardry, a bird from lands they'd never see, kept as casually as a cat. The marketplaces reflect this melting pot. At Billingsgate, fishmongers shout in several languages. At Cheapside, stalls groan with foreign spices, cinnamon, pepper, saffron, each more expensive than gold by weight. To buy a pinch is to show wealth. To sell it is to guarantee survival. A merchant dealing in spices might earn a fortune in one shipment, but he risks it all if pirates seize his cargo on the seas. Trade is opportunity, yes, but also gamble. You feel your stomach knot at the thought. So much wealth balanced on storms and swords. Not all foreigners stay in the merchant lanes. Some enter the city's cultural life. Musicians from abroad join festivals, their instruments strange and captivating. You pass a tavern where a blind minstrel from Spain plucks at strings unlike anything you've heard, the Londoners clapping along despite not knowing the words. These cultural exchanges blur the line between outsider and insider, weaving London's identity ever more complex. Still, the city's authorities never forget who belongs and who doesn't. Foreigners are often taxed differently, sometimes forced to register, occasionally restricted in what they can sell. Kings and mayors play a dangerous balancing act, encouraging trade for the city's prosperity while also appeasing the resentment of native merchants. One year foreigners are welcomed, the next they are scapegoated. You can almost feel the precariousness of it, like walking a tightrope with no net. And yet without these outsiders, London would be literally and figuratively. Without fish, tables would lack herring. Without Lombard loans, kings might not wage wars. Without Flemish cloth, fashions would falter. You realize the irony. The city grumbles about foreigners, but it cannot live without them. Historians still debate just how integrated these communities became. Did they marry locals? Did they form lasting neighborhoods? Or did they remain insular enclaves, speaking their own tongues behind closed doors? The records show both, some assimilation, some separation. Perhaps it varied family by family, year by year. As night falls, you stand again by the steel yard, watching a lantern swing in the breeze. Inside, merchants tally accounts, their shadows dancing against the walls. Outside, a Londoner mutters curses about foreign privilege. The tension hangs heavy, yet so does the scent of opportunity. For you, it's clear. In medieval London, to be an outsider is to be both coveted and resented, a stranger whose survival depends on walking the narrow path between welcome and hostility. And tomorrow, when the ships arrive with their sails full and their holds crammed with goods, the cycle will begin again. Money, trade, envy, survival. You drift to sleep wondering whether you'd rather be inside those guarded walls with the foreign traders or outside with the mob. Both paths seem perilous, both glitter with promise. By now, you've tramped through London's markets, lingered at the riverside warehouses, and even peeked inside candle-lit scriptoria. Yet tonight your footsteps take you somewhere more structured, almost ritualistic, the world of the guilds. The city hums differently here. Signs swing over doorways, a golden boot, a painted tallow candle, a shears crossed like swords. Each symbol announces not just a trade, but a fraternity, a brotherhood of workers bound by oath, custom, and centuries of tradition. The guild is the heartbeat of urban labor, and to make your living in London, you almost certainly must pass through its doors. But you can't simply stroll in and start making shoes or brewing ale. No, first comes the long, sometimes miserable path of apprenticeship. You imagine yourself as a boy, perhaps 12 years old, standing nervously in front of a master craftsman. Your father, if he has the means, pays a fee to bind you to this man. If he doesn't, you may be taken on as charity, but either way, your childhood ends in that moment. The clerk drafts the indenture. You promise to obey, to serve, to keep your master's secrets. You swear not to marry during your term, not to play dice, not to haunt taverns, not to waste your master's goods. In return, he promises to feed you, clothe you, and teach you the mysteries of the craft. The parchment is sealed and your fate is set. That day forward, you are an apprentice. Your life is the workshop. You sweep the floors, stoke the fire, run errands through the rain. If your master is kind, he will show you patiently how to cut leather, how to hammer nails, how to temper steel. If he is cruel, you may learn more from beatings than from teaching. There is no escape. The contract binds you as tightly as chains. Some apprentices run away, but the city watch drags them back. For 7 years, sometimes more, your life belongs to another man. Still, there is dignity in the training. As the years pass, your hands grow sure. You stitch shoes with steady thread, brew ale that froths golden in the mug, carve wood so smooth it feels like silk. You feel a surge of pride the first time your master lets you sign your mark on a finished piece. That object, small though it may be, carries your skill, your name. It's proof that you are not just a servant, you are becoming a craftsman. The guild itself oversees all this. Think of it as both school and police. Guild officials inspect workshops, scold masters who cheat apprentices, fine workers who cut corners. They protect the reputation of the craft. No shoemaker may sell shoddy boots, no baker may sell underweight loaves. If someone does, the punishment is public shamming or a fine. The guild crest hangs like a badge of honor. To belong is to have legitimacy. To be outside is to be suspect. One quirky tidbit: guilds loved pageantry. On feast days, apprentices marched in processions carrying banners, candles, sometimes even dressed as allegorical figures. Imagine yourself trudging in line, half bored, half proud, holding a long taper while the crowd cheers. The guild isn't just about work, it's about community, spectacle, belonging. But belonging comes at a price. After your apprenticeship ends, you are not yet free. You become a journeyman, literally a day man, wandering from shop to shop, hearing out your skills for wages. Are the backbone of London's labor force, skilled enough to produce fine goods, poor enough to keep working endlessly. They carry their tools wrapped in leather rolls, ready to prove themselves wherever a master has room. Journeyman life is uncertain. You earn coin, yes, but never quite enough to start your own shop. You lodge in cramped rooms, often sharing with others. You drink together, sing together, sometimes fight together. Your evenings are spent in taverns where dice rattle and arguments about wages boil. Masters accuse you of idleness, of drunkenness, of plotting mischief. You mutter that they hoard wealth, blocking your path to freedom. The tension simmers like ale left too long in the cask. Historians still argue whether formed something like proto-unions in medieval London. Some evidence suggests they organized strikes, refusing to work until wages rose. Others say they were too fragmented, too dependent on masters, to pose real resistance. The truth may be somewhere in between, bands of frustrated workers, gathering by candlelight whispering plans, yet never strong enough to overturn the guild system. To become a master yourself requires money and connections. You must produce a masterpiece, literally the object that proves your skill is worthy. It could be a pair of boots stitched without flaw, a lock crafted so cleverly it fools even the examiner, or a chest carved so finely it looks alive. If the guild approves, you may open your own shop, take apprentices, rise in status. If not, you remain a journeyman, trapped in limbo. The guild structure brings order to the chaos of the city, but it also creates barriers. Outsiders, foreigners, women, unfree laborers find the doors closed. Survival without guild membership is precarious. You may work on the margins, selling cheaper goods, but risk raids and confiscation. For you, the guild is both ladder and wall, raising you if you belong, shutting you out if you don't. Step into a guild hall and you'll feel the weight of tradition. The air smells of oak beams, wax candles, and roasted meat. Masters dine at long tables, apprentices serving ale. Toasts are made, prayers said, fines collected. This hall is not just an office, it's a theater of power. On its walls hang painted arms, reminders of the guild's dignity. You, as an apprentice, might cower in the corner, waiting to be called forward, heart pounding as officials examine your work. One fringe detail that delights you. Some guilds staged plays, often morality dramas performed by their members for the city. Imagine a group of carpenters dressing as biblical figures, performing Noah's Ark, while the audience roars approval. Your guild isn't just about trade. It shapes culture, theater, even religion. And yet the system creaks. Too many apprentices chasing too few masterships, growing restless. Women locked out, though many run shops when their husbands die. You sense cracks in the facade. Still, for now, the guild remains the spine of London. Night settles and you picture yourself lying on a straw pallet in your master's house. The workshop smells of leather, glue, smoke. Your hands ache, your back is sore, but tomorrow you'll rise and stitch again. Someday, perhaps, you'll stand before the guild with your masterpiece. Until then, you serve, you learn, you endure. In London, survival means bending to the guild's rhythm. Hopping one day it will raise you from servant to master. You wake to the clang of church bells again, but today you notice something different. The streets are full of women working. Not ladies in silks or nuns in habits, but ordinary London women, bending over tubs of laundry, balancing baskets of fish, carrying jugs of ale. For all the guild charters and merchant contracts you've seen, it becomes suddenly clear. Much of the city's survival rests on women's shoulders, even if no parchment records their names. Look closer at the houses along Cheapside. Behind the shutters, wives are busy managing shops while husbands are away. You see one woman weighing out cloth, another haggling with a customer over a bolt of linen. Officially, the shop might belong to Master John, but in practice, Mistress is the one keeping the business afloat. Historians still argue whether women had recognized legal standing as independent traders, or whether they were seen merely as extensions of their husbands. Yet the evidence of your own eyes is plain. Women's labor is everywhere, essential, and often invisible. Step into a tavern, and you'll likely find it run by a woman, called an alewife. She stirs great vats of malt, skims froth, pours foaming mugs for rowdy patrons. Some alewives grow prosperous enough to be known across neighborhoods. Others teeter constantly on the edge of ruin, fined for weak ale or accused of cheating measures. One quirky tidbit: surviving a size of ale records sometimes complain that women watered down beer or sold it in cups smaller than regulation. It's a reminder that even in medieval times, People grumbled about getting short-poured. And then there's domestic labor, the endless, grinding work that never makes it into chronicles. You picture yourself in a narrow kitchen, smoke filling your eyes as you turn spits heavy with meat, or more often, scrape thin broth from a pot that must stretch to feed a family. Washing, mending, child-rearing. None of it glamorous, none of it well-paid, yet without it the city would collapse. You pass a washerwoman hauling linens to the Thames, arms reddened from scrubbing. Work communally, gossiping as they beat fabric against stones, their laughter and complaints mixing with the rush of water. Their pay is pitiful, their backs ache constantly, but they wield small influence. In a city where lice and filth are constant, clean clothes mark respectability. You realize suddenly that even a knight must rely on some woman to keep his shirts white. In the markets, women dominate the sale of food. You hear the cries, fresh apples, sweet pears, come taste. Stall after stall is tended by women, their children tugging at their skirts. They sell bread, dairy, herbs, and vegetables, small goods vital to daily life. Men may control the big shipments of grain or the wholesale fish trade, but it's women who retail these necessities, who interact with neighbors daily. If you want to survive in London, you'll likely buy your food from a woman's hand. Some women find niches in crafts, though guilds often exclude them. A widow might continue her husband's trade by right, running a workshop and training apprentices. You see one such figure, hammer in hand, shaping pewter plates with practiced ease. Her neighbors nod respectfully. She's not just surviving, she's thriving despite the odds. But not every woman has that chance. Many must scrape together pennies with piecemeal work, spinning thread, sewing clothes, brewing ale for sale by the jug. Historians still debate how much independence these women truly had. Were they free economic agents, or always under male authority, husband, father, or guild master? The records are contradictory. A widow listed as a shopkeeper one year may vanish the next, absorbed into remarriage or lost in poverty. Yet traces suggest resilience, adaptability, and agency far beyond what they admit. One quirky image lingers with you: a brewster, or female brewer, standing proudly in her yard with a tall pole topped by a bunch of hops or ivy, signaling that ale is for sale. That greenery flutters in the wind, visible from far off, a medieval advertisement as clever as any neon sign. Neighbors flock, mugs in hand, and for a moment this woman's house becomes the heart of the community. Of course, the city can be harsh. Women accused of scolding too loudly or selling bad ale are dragged into court. Some face the cucking stool, publicly dunked in water as punishment. You shiver, imagining the humiliation. Survival requires not only hard work but careful navigation of reputation. Too bold and you risk censure. Too meek and you starve. Among the classes, women often work side by side with men. On the docks, you spot, famous for their loud voices and quick tempers, carrying baskets bigger than themselves. Their gossip is legendary, their insults sharper than knives. Some even march into city politics, shouting at officials when grain prices rise too high. Their presence reminds you that survival is not just private toil, it can be public protest. Then there are women in service. Many young girls leave their families to work in wealthier households as maids or nursemaids. They scrub floors, fetch water, rock bobbies through the night. For some, it's a chance to learn skills or find husbands. For others, it's exploitation, long hours with little pay and no security. You picture a girl staring out of an upper floor window, dreaming of freedom while polishing silver. One fringe detail catches your imagination. Some in London were so respected that they carried official licenses from the bishop. Their work straddled the line between practical skill and spiritual responsibility, as they were called upon not only to deliver bobbies, but also to baptize infants in emergencies. Imagine the trust placed in their hands: life, death, and eternal salvation, all in one breath. As night falls, you think back over the day. The guilds boast of their masters, the markets brag of their merchants, the courts record the words of men. But in the alleys, kitchens, and stalls, women labor constantly, their contributions woven invisibly into the fabric of the city. Without them, no bread is sold, No ale brewed, no clothes washed, no bobbies born safely. Historians still argue how to measure that hidden labor, but you walking these streets in your mind don't need parchment proof. You see it, smell it, hear it. The chatter of market stalls, the hiss of ale frothing into cups, the thump of laundry against stone. Women's work may be hidden in records, but in life, it is everywhere. You settle into bed with that thought, realizing that making a living in medieval London isn't just about visible trades or official guilds. It's about invisible hands, countless, unrecorded, yet indispensable. If you want to survive here, you'd better thank the washerwoman, pay the alewife fairly, and never underestimate the widow with hammer or spindle. She might be working harder than anyone else in the city. You wake again to the sound of coughing in the narrow lane outside. Not the polite coughs of today, but deep, rattling hacks that echo through timber walls, punctuated by moans and groans. This is medieval London, and sickness is never far away. You draw your cloak, realizing that in this city, health is precarious, and poverty lies only a missed meal or two away. Step into the streets and you can almost smell the risk. The gutters reek of waste, pigs root through rubbish piles, and the Thames, London's pride and lifeline, is fouled with refuse from every household. People still drink its water, oblivious to the dangers. Disease spreads here like fire through dry thatch, and you're about to see why. The most dreaded sickness you hear whispered about is plague. Old women cross themselves when they recall the Black Death of a century before, which killed perhaps half the city's population. Survivors still tell grim stories of carts piled high with corpses, of churchyards overflowing, of priests too afraid to perform last rites. Though decades have passed, smaller outbreaks still flare up, each one sending waves of terror through the crowded lanes. You imagine the dread of seeing a dark swelling appear on your skin, knowing it might be the first sign of death. But plague is not the only enemy. Leprosy haunts people's fears as well. You picture the leper hospitals on the outskirts of town, where sufferers are confined, their bodies marked by sores, their presence feared as both contagion and curse. Bells announce their approach, warning others to keep their distance. Yet historians now think the disease may not have been as contagious as people believed. It was the stigma that ruined lives more than the illness itself. Then there's the endless tide of fevers, fluxes, and agues. Typhoid, dysentery, smallpox, measles, names that barely mean anything today to the well-protected. But in medieval London they strike constantly, especially among children. You imagine a mother holding her feverish child, praying desperately at a church altar, knowing the odds are slim. Infant mortality is brutal. Perhaps 1 in 3 children die before reaching adulthood. That fact alone reshapes how families think about life. Every child is a blessing, but also a gamble. You head toward a neighborhood and the misery deepens. Shabby cottages crowd together, smoke blackening their thatch, doors hanging crooked. Inside, entire families squeeze into a single room, sleeping shoulder to shoulder. Lice crawl through bedding, fleas bite at ankles, and hunger gnaws constantly. The smell of unwashed bodies and cooking cabbage thickens the air. For the survival is a day-to-day struggle. It's here that begging becomes unavoidable. You pass a cripple dragging himself along the street, wooden bowl extended. "For the love of God, a penny," he pleads. Nearby, a blind woman sings hymns in a cracked voice, hopping to stir pity. Children with hollow cheeks reach out to strangers, their hands trembling. The city swarms with beggars, and attitudes toward them are complicated. Some are, others despised. Preachers thunder against sturdy beggars, accusing them of laziness and sin. Yet many have no choice. Illness, disability, or widowhood has stripped them of all other means. Almsgiving is a religious duty, so wealthier citizens drop coins in bowls, hopping to buy both salvation and good reputation. But there's suspicion, too. Satirical poems complain of beggars faking wounds, smearing their bodies with herbs to look diseased, or carrying counterfeit licenses. The line between genuine desperation and trickery blurs. You imagine yourself walking cheapside, torn between compassion and doubt every time a hand reaches out. Hospitals in London try to provide relief, but they are not like modern medical centers. Founded in the 12th century, is less a place of healing and more a place of refuge. Patients lie in long halls, tended by monks or nuns, who offer food, prayer, and comfort. Treatments might include bleeding, herbal remedies, or charms, but often survival depends simply on rest and luck. Rich benefactors donate money to such institutions, hoping to ease suffering and earn heavenly merit. But space is limited, and they often die in alleys or at parish doorsteps, never having seen the inside of a hospital. You pause outside a parish church and watch a curious sight: the poor box, a locked chest where donations are collected for needy parishioners. Almoners distribute coins to the destitute, though not always fairly. Politics and favoritism creep in. Friends of the churchwardens get help first. Strangers are left to starve. It's a reminder that charity is never just about kindness. It's also about power, reputation, and control. The city authorities do try to regulate poverty. From time to time, orders go out expelling vagabonds from the streets or requiring beggars to return to their home villages. But enforcement is patchy, and hunger drives people back. You realize that poverty in medieval London isn't a small problem. It's woven into the very structure of the city. With wealth concentrated in a few hands and wages never keeping up with prices, thousands hover on the brink. One chilling detail stays with you. In times of famine, when harvests fail and grain prices soar, poor Londoners are sometimes found dead in the streets, clutching empty bellies. Chronicles record these tragedies bluntly, without sentiment. For the medieval poor, hunger is not an occasional discomfort. It is a constant shadow, always waiting to strike. And yet, amid all this suffering, life continues. You see street entertainers juggling to distract from misery, and poor children playing with scraps of wood as toys. Beggars gather at taverns to share gossip and scraps of bread. Neighbors pool resources to help a widow through winter. There's resilience here too, a determination to survive against crushing odds. Historians sometimes argue about whether medieval people were hardened to death and poverty, or whether they grieved as deeply as we do. Walking these imagined streets, you sense both. Death is familiar, yet tears still fall. Hunger is expected, yet the joy of a feast is all the for its rarity. People adapt, but they do not become stone. You sit at the edge of the market square as dusk falls. The wealthy withdraw to their shuttered homes while the poor stretch out on straw beds under doorways. Torches flicker, casting shadows on faces lined with exhaustion. A beggar sings softly, his tune carrying across the darkening street. It is haunting, but also strangely comforting, proof that even in poverty and sickness, humanity endures. As you prepare to sleep, you reflect on how disease and poverty shape every aspect of life in medieval London. They dictate how families plan their futures, how churches preach about charity, how neighbors judge one another, how the city organizes itself. To make a living here, you cannot ignore them. They are as much a part of the city's fabric as its churches, markets, and walls. Morning again, and once more you feel your purse growing lighter before you even step outside. In medieval London, earning a living is only half the battle. Keeping hold of your hard-won coins is another story entirely. Taxes, tolls, and tithes circle you like three hungry wolves, each one demanding its bite. And the funny thing is, no matter how poor or prosperous you are, they always seem to find you. You wander down a cobbled lane, clutching the few pennies you scraped together yesterday, and immediately you're reminded that nothing in the city moves freely. At the gates, the watchmen collect tolls on goods coming in and out. If you're a merchant bringing in wool bales or fish from the coast, you must pay. If you're a farmer carrying a cart of turnips, you must pay. Even if you're just buying your own firewood, the toll collectors want their share. These fees swell the city coffers, funding repairs to walls, bridges, and ditches, or at least, that's the official story. You suspect some of it quietly slips into private purses. Now if you happen to cross London Bridge, the only bridge across the Thames, you face another gauntlet of charges. Imagine trudging along, only to be stopped and asked for a few coins for passage, or to sell your wares in the shops that cram the bridge itself. No free shortcuts here. The bridge is London's pride, but it is also its piggy bank. Every step across seems to rattle with the sound of money changing hands. But civic tolls are just the beginning. The king himself demands taxes, and when a monarch needs cash, the city's wealth is squeezed like a lemon. Wars in France, castles to repair, royal weddings, all excuses for special levies. Officials knock on doors, tallying goods and property, assessing who owes what. Refusal is dangerous. The crown may seize your goods or worse. You realize quickly that loyalty in medieval England isn't just about banners and oaths. It's about opening your purse when summoned. Parliament occasionally grants a poll tax, a flat fee paid by every adult. Sounds simple, until you recall that in 1381, this very tax pushed too far, sparked the infamous Peasants' Revolt. Crowds surged through London, burning records, storming the tower, and nearly toppling royal authority. Historians still argue whether it was the unfairness of the tax itself or the corruption in its collection that drove people to fury. Either way, the lesson is clear. Squeeze people too hard, and sooner or later they fight back. Back at the parish level, the church has its own claim on your earnings. The tithe, 1/10 of everything you produce. It could be grain, fish, or even the lambs from your flock. For the average laborer, that means parting with food you desperately need. Picture yourself bringing your harvest to the church barn, stacking sheaves under the watchful eye of the reeve, who ensures you don't skimp. Some priests are lenient, others strict to the point of cruelty. One story whispers of a farmer excommunicated for hiding a piglet from tithe collectors. Another tells of villagers rebelling by delivering rotten produce, a cheeky but dangerous protest. The church insists the tithe supports God's work, maintaining the parish, feeding the poor, lighting candles for the altar. But you can't help noticing that bishops ride in fine robes, their tables laden with delicacies. It raises the uneasy suspicion that heaven's treasury and the clergy's pantry are not entirely separate. And let's not forget fees at life's milestones. Baptisms, marriages, burials, all require a payment to the parish. Imagine scraping by for years, then being told you must pay a few shillings just to bury your loved one in consecrated ground. Families sometimes plunge into debt to meet these demands, fearing their dead would otherwise rest outside the churchyard wall. Death itself, it seems, is taxable. City guilds pile on their own dues. To belong to the bakers, butchers, or weavers guild, you pay regular fees. They promise protection and trade rights, but every coin that leaves your hand makes you wonder if you'll ever actually climb out of poverty. And if you're not in a guild, good luck. You'll pay in fines for selling outside their rules, and you'll pay bribes just to avoid harassment. Then there's rent. If you think of medieval London as a patchwork of freeholders, think again. Much of the land belongs to lords, abbeys, or the church, and tenants pay dearly. Yearly rents eat into wages, and late payment risks eviction. Worse still, many leases require extra Harriet payments, literally a death duty. When a tenant dies, the landlord can seize their best animal or household goods before heirs inherit. Imagine losing your family cow or your father's tools at the very moment you most need them. Walking further, you notice customs duties at the wharves. Merchants unloading wine, cloth, or spices must pay heavy imposts, swelling royal revenues. It makes exotic goods so expensive that ordinary folk rarely taste them. A sip of imported wine or a pinch of pepper becomes a luxury you might only dream about. And who enforces these duties? Royal officials with scales and ledgers, who are not above losing a record for a discreet bribe. What's striking is how every layer of medieval society feeds on those below. The king taxes the city taxes the guilds charge their members, and the poor worker at the bottom pays them all. It's a financial pyramid, and you're stuck balancing at the base, struggling not to collapse. You overhear a market seller mutter that a man might work 6 days a week, only to find his 7th swallowed by dues. And he isn't exaggerating. Studies of surviving records suggest that some Londoners might surrender as much as a third of their income to taxes, tolls, and tithes combined. That's before rent, food, clothing, and fuel. You can't help but laugh grimly. Modern folks groan about taxes, but at least most of them don't hand over grain by the sheaf or livestock by the head. Of course, evasion exists. People underreport goods, smuggle items through backstreets, or bribe collectors. A brewer might forget to declare a few barrels. A fisherman might sell part of his catch before reaching the toll gate. Entire neighborhoods sometimes shield their own from collectors, standing shoulder to shoulder in defiance. But such defiance carries risk. Punishments include fines, confiscation, or imprisonment. Still, for many, the temptation outweighs the fear. The irony is that even those who resent the system recognize its necessity. Without tolls, the city's walls would crumble. Without taxes, soldiers couldn't defend England's borders. Without tithes, the parish church would fall silent. But necessity doesn't make the sting any less sharp. And so, every Londoner walks a tightrope, working hard, hopping to keep enough to feed their family, and forever feeling watched by a dozen hands reaching for their purse. You can almost hear the coins clinking, not just when they fall into your palm, but louder still when they are taken away. As night settles and you return to your lodgings, you count your dwindling pennies. Tomorrow you'll work again, not just to live, but to satisfy the endless appetite of crown, city, guild, and church. The wolves circle still, their hunger never sated, and you, like every other Londoner, must keep feeding them if you wish to survive. The bells ring out, but this time they are not tolling for mass or for another city tax collection. No, today their clang has a lighter rhythm, a quickened pulse, as if the very air is humming with excitement. You step into the streets and feel it instantly. Something is different. Stalls are being built, banners unfurled, and the smell of roasting meat wafts over rooftops. London is preparing for a festival, and for once, poverty and toil loosen their grip. Imagine the gray days of labor you've endured, hauling, selling, scrubbing, bartering, begging. Now picture that routine suddenly broken by color, music, and laughter. Medieval Londoners clung to these festivals and fairs as eagerly as you might cling to a holiday weekend. They were brief escapes, temporary reversals of fortune, and moments when even the could feel rich in spirit. The most famous of these celebrations is Fair, held each August in Smithfield. Normally a pasture for cattle and a site of grim executions, Smithfield transforms into a carnival ground. You join the crowd surging toward it, your senses overloaded. Rows of stalls line the field, selling cloth, spices, trinkets, and toys. Farmers drive herds of sheep and oxen through the throng, their bells clanging, while merchants haggle loudly over prices. The fair is both marketplace and playground, a place where serious business and wild revelry collide. You wander through and catch sight of a puppet show, wooden figures cavorting on strings while children squeal with delight. Nearby, a juggler tosses knives into the air, balancing on a barrel, his cap outstretched for pennies. A bear, muzzled and chained, lumbers as its keeper cracks a whip, while onlookers cheer and jeer. It's chaotic, noisy, and mesmerizing. You think of how rare this must feel to a medieval laborer whose life is otherwise defined by monotony and hardship. Food stalls tempt you with sizzling delights. Spiced pies, honey cakes, roasted nuts, ale flowing by the jug. You remember how often hunger stalks these streets, and now, suddenly, food seems abundant. The smell of ginger and cinnamon tickles your nose, luxuries most can't afford in daily life, but which appear here in small, tantalizing bites. You picture yourself biting into a sweetmeat, savoring a moment of extravagance you know won't last. But it's not only about indulgence. Fairs are crucial for trade. Merchants from across England, even from Flanders, France, and Italy, flock to sell goods. Londoners eye bolts of fine cloth, gleaming pewter, or exotic spices with longing. Deals are struck, debts settled, and fortunes made or lost. For a few days, the city becomes a hub of international commerce. Wealth flows in, though not always into the hands of the poor who throng the stalls. Still, even they might scrape enough to buy a ribbon, a wooden toy, or a few candied nuts. carrying home a rare treasure. The church, of course, keeps its hand in the festivities. Many fairs are tied to saints' feast days, blending sacred and secular. You pass a procession of clerics chanting hymns, their robes bright against the dust. The fair is officially opened with blessings, though one suspect's god might raise an eyebrow at the drunken brawls and dice games that soon follow. Historians still argue whether these fairs were more about piety or profit, but as you watch a monk discreetly sip ale at a tavern tent, you know the answer is probably both. Alongside fairs are annual festivals that mark the turning of seasons. Shrove Tuesday brings pancakes, bell-ringing, and boisterous games before Lent's somber fast. May Day sees Londoners gathering greenery, crowning May queens, and dancing around poles, their laughter echoing late into the night. Corpus processions fill the streets with pageants, where guild members dress as biblical characters, rolling elaborate wagons through cheering crowds. For one day, hierarchies bend. The lord might laugh at a fool's jest, the beggar might dance in the same circle as a wealthy merchant. Carnival spirit flips the usual rules, making the world topsy-turvy. Mock kings are elected, jesters crowned, women sing bawdy songs in the streets. You grin at the mischief of it all, knowing tomorrow the strict order of London will clamp back down. But for now, it's a delicious taste of freedom. Even punishments take on a festive air. Public executions draw massive crowds, blending horror and carnival. You find yourself uneasy as vendors sell pies and ale while a condemned man climbs the scaffold. Children sit on shoulders to get a better view. It's morbid, yes, but also a reminder. Life and death mingle freely here, and the spectacle becomes part of communal memory. You hear jokes about hanging days being good for business at the taverns. Grim humor, but humor nonetheless. Fleeting wealth often appears during these occasions. A lucky gambler wins at dice and struts through the fair with a purse suddenly heavy. A juggler earns more in one day's performance than in a week of street begging. Even a poor seamstress might stitch ribbons and sell enough to buy her children meat for supper. For many, these moments are rare but precious. They remind them that fortune can change, even if only briefly. Still, not everyone approves. Preachers warn that fairs breed sin, drunkenness, lust, greed, and violence. Chronicles note fistfights breaking out, or thieves cutting purses in the press of the crowd. City officials sometimes issue stern regulations. No selling after dark, no dice games, no brawling. Of course, people ignore them. Human nature does not change because someone wrote a proclamation. As twilight falls over Smithfield, torches are lit, music swells, and dancers spin in circles. You feel the city itself exhaling, as though for a brief moment it forgets its burdens. Yet even as you watch, you sense the transience. Tomorrow the stalls will come down, the banners will be folded, and the field will once again host cattle, executions, and ordinary trade. Fleeting wealth will vanish, joy will fade, and the grind of survival will resume. Historians sometimes debate whether festivals truly improved the lives of the poor or whether they were merely distractions, bread and circuses designed to pacify the masses. As you stand in the glow of torches, laughter ringing in your ears, you realize the answer doesn't matter much. What matters is how it feels, this brief suspension of hardship, this glimpse of another world. For one night, Londoners are not just laborers, apprentices, or beggars. They are dancers, revelers, and dreamers. You head back through the winding streets, clutching a sticky sweet you couldn't resist buying. Children dart past, clutching wooden whistles, their eyes sparkling. Somewhere a fiddler still plays, his tune fading into the distance. And as you return to your bed of straw, you realize that sometimes survival is not only about bread, it's about joy. Festivals may be fleeting, but the memory of them sustains you through long winters and endless toil. Tomorrow will be another day of scraping and paying, but tonight, in your dreams, you will still be dancing under banners, eating spiced pies, and laughing until your sides ache. The candles burn low and London exhales into silence. The shouting of markets, the clang of hammers, the toll of bells, all have quieted, replaced by the shuffle of late-night stragglers and the occasional bark of a dog. You lie down on your straw pallet, the faint scent of hay and smoke in your nose. your stomach growling softly. Tonight, like every night, your thoughts circle around the same question: will there be bread tomorrow? Bread is not just food here. It is survival, currency, and comfort. The city quite literally runs on loaves, wheaten for the wealthy, coarse rye and for the poor. The assize of bread and ale, a law dating back to the 13th century, sets strict regulations on the price and weight of loaves. Bakers who cheat, giving short weight or charging too much, risk public humiliation. You've seen it. A baker paraded through the streets with a false loaf hung around his neck, or even dragged to the pillory where angry neighbors pelt him with rotten vegetables. It's a reminder that bread is too important to be tampered with. Yet laws can't conjure grain when harvests fail. In bad years, Londoners dread the hungry gap, the late spring weeks when old stores run low and new crops are not yet ready. Bread grows smaller, more expensive, and often adulterated. Some bakers mix in beans, peas, or even powdered chalk to stretch flour further. You imagine biting into a loaf that crunches oddly, realizing the baker has played tricks and cursing your aching teeth. Hunger shapes your nights. You lie awake listening to your belly complain, while the wealthier folk in their timber houses dine on trenchers piled high with meat. Inequality is sharpest when it comes to food. You might gnaw a crust, while guild masters feast on capons, venison, and custards thick with sugar. And still, both rich and poor worry about tomorrow's bread, for if plague, fire, or famine strikes, all are vulnerable. You dream of apprentices waking before dawn to queue at the bakehouse, waiting for the first warm loaves. You picture housewives clutching coins, haggling, grumbling, then carrying precious bread home under their cloaks. Children peek eagerly, hopping for a bite before supper. Bread weaves itself into every corner of daily life, eaten with ale at breakfast, dipped into pottage at dinner, crumbled into broth at night. Without it, the day feels incomplete. Sometimes, though, tomorrow's bread feels almost mythical. Famines sweep through England from time to time. The Great Famine of 1315-17 still lingers in memory, when relentless rain ruined crops and thousands starved. Chronicles describe desperate people boiling nettles, eating horseflesh, even digging up roots. The stories haunt the city's imagination, feeding a collective fear that hunger could return at any moment. Historians still debate how exaggerated some of these famine tales are, but the truth is clear. Food insecurity was a constant shadow. And bread is never just bread. It is also politics. When prices rise too high, riots erupt. You've heard tales of bread riots, when angry crowds storm bakeries or seize carts of grain. City officials know this well, which is why they monitor markets closely. The mayor and aldermen walk the streets, inspecting loaves, anxious to avoid unrest. After all, a hungry population is a dangerous one. Yet there are moments of plenty too. Harvest festivals, feasts, or good years bring abundance, when bread is baked in huge rounds and shared at communal tables. On feast days, gilded loaves might even be served, bread covered in gold leaf, a dazzling display of wealth and devotion. You can't help but laugh at the absurdity. The poor struggle for crusts while the rich literally gild their food. Still, both rich and poor understand bread as both nourishment and symbol. Your thoughts drift further to the very act of breaking bread. It binds people together, families around a table, guild brothers in a hall, parishioners at communion. To share bread is to share life. Even beggars outside the church hope for a crust handed out after Mass. For them, tomorrow's bread is not just hoped for, but prayed for. Each, "Give us this day our daily bread," carrying a visceral urgency. You turn over on your straw, hearing rats scurry in the corner, and your mind wanders to strange alternatives. Did you know that some Londoners experimented with famine bread? Recipes survive for loaves made with ground acorns, nettles, or even fern roots. They were bitter, unwholesome, and sometimes dangerous, but desperate bellies don't argue. You imagine chewing a mouthful of acorn bread, grimacing at its harsh taste, yet grateful for anything to fill the void. Still, hope persists. You recall fairs where stalls overflowed with baked goods, honey cakes, gingerbread, little luxuries that turned bread into joy. Perhaps tomorrow, if luck shines, You'll taste something sweet instead of plain rye. That tiny possibility keeps you going, makes the hunger bearable. As you lie half asleep, you reflect on how tomorrow's bread is always uncertain, always contingent on forces far beyond your control. The weather, the harvest, the miller's honesty, the baker's skill, the price set by law. You realize that survival in medieval London is not just about hard work, but about luck and resilience. And yet, despite everything, the hunger, the fear, the endless struggle, you dream. You dream of loaves warm from the oven, their crusts crackling, the smell filling the lane. You dream of a day when your stomach is full, when you don't have to count every crumb. That dream, as fragile as it is, sustains you more than the bread itself. And now the candles gutter low, and our journey through medieval London slows to a gentle close. The clang of hammers, the bustle of markets, the ringing of bells, they all fade into the distance, replaced by softer sounds. The quiet lapping of the Thames at its banks, the murmur of voices settling into sleep behind shuttered doors. You've walked the streets, felt the weight of taxes, watched festivals bloom and fade, smelled the smoke of bakehouses, and heard the coughs of the sick echo in alleys. You've seen the city in its splendor and its struggle, its moments of fleeting joy and its long stretches of hardship. And through it all, you've carried the same simple question every Londoner once carried. Will there be bread tomorrow? Close your eyes now and let yourself drift. Imagine the warmth of a loaf pressed into your hands, the soft hum of a lullaby floating through a wooden shutter, the flicker of torchlight fading into darkness. The city continues without you, but for tonight, you can set aside its noise and hunger. Breathe slowly, evenly, like the tide that ebbs and flows against London's shores. Let your body sink, heavy and safe, as if into the deepest feather mattress, even if in truth it's just straw and cloth. Feel time blur, centuries melting away, until all that remains is stillness. And as you rest, remember, tomorrow always comes, and with it, perhaps, bread, laughter, and another day of survival. Sleep well, traveler. Sweet dreams.